Admiral Kyle Morrison sat in his chair at Terra Defense Command, staring at his computer screen. The message that had just arrived made his stomach turn. It was from Admiral Vextal, one of the most powerful leaders in the Galactic Collective. The alien's words painted a picture so horrible that Morrison had to read it 3 times to believe it. The peaceful Rillan colonies were dying. Not in battle, not from disease, but from something far worse. The Devourer swarm had found them, Morrison had heard whispers about the swarm before. They were a nightmare species that moved from world to world like hungry locusts. But what made them truly terrifying was how they fed. They didn't just kill their victims quickly, they kept them alive, conscious, and aware while slowly dissolving their bodies for food. The process could take weeks. The Admiral looked at the attached video files, clicked on one, and immediately wished he hadn't. Thousands of Rylan civilians hung in transparent sacks, their eyes wide with terror and pain. They were still breathing, still thinking, still feeling everything as the bioships slowly consumed them alive. Morrison turned off the video and rubbed his temples. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Amy Brooks said as she walked into his office. She was one of his best intelligence officers, and her face was pale. "The Collective is asking for something they swore they'd never ask for." "What do you mean?" Morrison asked, though he was starting to guess. "They want us to break quarantine. They want human military forces to respond to this crisis." Amy pulled up more data on her tablet. "Their own forces are spread across 17 different conflicts right now. They don't have enough ships to mount a proper response." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me get this straight. The same aliens who locked us away because we were too violent now want us to solve their problems with violence?" Amy nodded. "It gets worse, sir. According to their bureaucratic rules, any military response has to be approved by 12 different committees. Each committee needs at least 2 weeks to review the situation. Then there's a cooling-off period of another month before any action can be taken." "How long would that take total?" Morrison asked. 4 to 6 months minimum," Amy replied. "Swarm will have consumed 3 more solar systems by then. We're talking about billions of lives." Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of New Washington stretching to the horizon. Earth had been peaceful for 20 years since the border wars ended. Those wars had earned humanity a reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. Alien races called humans Deathworlders because Earth was considered one of the most hostile planets anyone had ever survived on. The Galactic Collective had decided that humans were too aggressive, too quick to use deadly force, too willing to fight to the death, so they had quarantined Earth, cutting off trade and communication with the rest of the galaxy. Humanity was allowed to exist, but they had to stay in their own solar system. "Sir, there's something else," Amy said quietly. "The message includes personal testimony from some of the Rylon survivors who escaped. They're begging for help. One of them said that the swarm doesn't just consume bodies, they consume memories too. The victims stay conscious long enough to watch their own thoughts and personalities get eaten away piece by piece." Morrison felt his anger building. This wasn't just about territory or resources. This was about innocent people suffering in the end. Worst way possible, while bureaucrats filed paperwork. "Amy, get me President Hayes on the emergency line. Tell him it's code red priority," Morrison ordered. "And while you're doing that, send a message to Admiral Carter at Mars Station. Tell her to prep the 3rd Fleet for immediate deployment." "Sir, we're still under quarantine. If we leave the solar system without permission, the Collective could declare war on us," Amy warned. Morrison looked at her with steel in his eyes. "Let them try. The Collective spent 20 years telling us we were too violent to be trusted. Now they're about to learn exactly what that violence looks like when it's protecting the innocent." He sat back down at his desk and began typing orders. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was humanity's most powerful military force. 200 ships, 40,000 Marines, and enough firepower to level continents. They could be ready to launch. Within 48 hours, as Amy left to carry out his orders, Morrison looked once more at the image of the suffering Rylans. The Galactic Collective had called humans monsters and locked them away. Now those same monsters were the only hope for billions of innocent lives. You wanted to see what Deathworlders could do, Morrison muttered to himself. You're about to get a front row seat. President Jack Hayes was eating breakfast when the emergency call came through. He was scheduled for a peaceful morning of budget meetings and trade discussions. That changed the moment Admiral Morrison's face appeared on his secure screen. Master. President, I'm sending you classified footage. You need to see this immediately, Morrison said with a grim expression. Hayes put down his coffee and activated his personal terminal. What he saw made him push his plate away. The video showed creatures that looked like giant jellyfish floating through space, but these weren't peaceful ocean dwellers. These were living ships filled with transparent pods. Inside each pod was a Rillan civilian, suspended in green liquid, their eyes wide with terror and pain. How long have they been like this? Hayes asked, his voice tight. Some for weeks, sir. The Devour Swarm keeps them alive on purpose. They believe fear makes the meat taste better. Hayes watched as one of the pods pulsed, and the Rillan inside screamed silently into the liquid. The president closed the video and stood up from his desk. He'd seen war footage before, had made tough decisions about military action, but this was different. This was pure evil. What does the Galactic Collective want from us? Hayes asked. Military intervention, sir? Their bureaucracy will take months to approve action. Billions will die while they debate. Hayes looked at his watch. It was 7:23 a.m. By 7:35 a.m. he had signed the authorization for Operation Cleansing Fire. The decision took him 12 minutes only because he spent 10 of those minutes making sure he understood the full scope of what he was approving. Meanwhile, near Mars, Admiral Beth Carter was running combat drills with the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet when her communications officer burst onto the bridge. Admiral, Priority 1 message from Earth Command. The young officer announced. Carter read the orders twice to make sure she understood correctly. The 3rd Fleet was being deployed outside the solar system for the first time in 20 years. They were breaking quarantine to fight an enemy that specialized in keeping people alive while eating them slowly. All ships, this is Admiral Carter, she announced over the fleet communication system. Cancel current exercises and prepare for immediate combat deployment. We have authorization for Operation Cleansing Fire. The response was instant. Across 200 ships, 40,000 Marines and sailors began preparing for war. Supply ships moved between vessels, loading ammunition, food, medical supplies, and spare parts. Fighter pilots ran pre-flight checks on their craft. Marine units reviewed assault plans and checked their equipment. Captain Mike Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his heavy cruiser, the Vengeance, watching the controlled chaos of a fleet preparing for battle. His ship was one of the newest in the human navy, armed with weapons that other species had banned as too destructive. Captain, we're detecting alien monitoring stations tracking our movements, his sensor operator reported. They seem very interested in how fast we're moving. Rodriguez smiled grimly. I bet they are. Patch me through to Admiral Carter. Carter here. The Admiral's voice came through clearly. Ma'am, the alien observers seem surprised by our response time. Their own protocols apparently require weeks of preparation before launching any military operation. Carter's laugh was cold and sharp. Rodriguez, the collective spent 3 weeks just debating whether this situation required a response. We're going to launch our fleet before their committees even finish reading the proposal. Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Officers who had spent years in peaceful training exercises were now preparing for the kind of warfare that had made humanity feared throughout the galaxy. The border wars had ended 20 years ago, but the human military had not grown soft. If anything, they had become more efficient, more deadly, more focused. All ships report ready for departure, Carter's operations officer announced. Carter stood on her bridge looking out at the formation of human warships. Vessel was a masterpiece of engineering designed for one purpose: to destroy enemies completely and efficiently. The aliens had called humanity too violent for civilized space. They had quarantined Earth because humans fought with an intensity that other species found disturbing. Engage jump drives, Carter ordered. Let's show the galaxy what happens when you ask monsters for help. The space around Mars lit up as 200 human ships activated their faster-than-light engines simultaneously. The energy release was so massive that monitoring stations across the solar system detected it. Within seconds, the entire Third Expeditionary Fleet had disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only radiation signatures and the knowledge that Earth's warriors were heading to war for the first time in 2 decades. On distant alien worlds, intelligence officers scrambled to report what they had witnessed. The humans had gone from peaceful training exercises to full military deployment in less than 48 hours. No other species in the galaxy could move that quickly, that decisively, or with that level of coordination. The Deathworlders were coming, and the universe was about to remember why everyone had been so afraid of them. The Third Fleet's jump drives powered down as 200 human warships materialized at the edge of Rillan space. What they found waiting for them was beyond anyone's worst nightmares. Commander Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, Retribution, staring at the main viewing screen in complete horror. 3 entire planets had been transformed into something that looked like massive organic factories. The surfaces of these worlds writhed and pulsed like they were alive, covered in what appeared to be enormous bioships that resembled giant beating hearts. Sensors are picking up millions of life signs, the ship's science officer reported, his voice shaking. They're inside those structures, Admiral. Hayes zoomed in the display and immediately wished she hadn't, suspended throughout. The organic ships were countless transparent pods, each one containing a Rylon civilian. The aliens were still alive, their eyes moving, their mouths opening in silent screams as green fluid slowly dissolved their bodies from the outside in. God, Hayes whispered. They're keeping them conscious through the whole process. Admiral Carter's voice came through the communication system, cold and sharp as a blade. All units, this is Admiral Carter. What you're seeing is exactly why we're here. These creatures don't just kill their victims, they torture them. Feed on fear and pain. The human fleet spread out in attack formation as more horrible details became clear. The bioships weren't just consuming the Rylan's bodies. Scans showed that they were also extracting memories and experiences, feeding on the victims' minds while their bodies were slowly digested. Some of the pods showed Rylans who had been there for weeks, reduced to skeletal forms but still somehow alive and aware. Fleet status report, Carter ordered. All ships ready for combat, Admiral, came the response from her operations officer. Weapon systems are online and targeting solutions are locked. Carter took a deep breath. The human fleet had trained for many scenarios, but nothing quite like this. The Devour Swarm represented everything that humanity instinctively fought against. They were predators who inflicted maximum suffering for no reason except their own. Twisted pleasure. All units, weapons free. Scorched Earth protocols are now in effect, Carter announced across all fleet channels. I want every single one of these abominations eliminated completely. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy. The Devour Swarm had been feeding peacefully when the human ships appeared. At first, they were simply curious. They had never encountered this particular species before, and new prey was always interesting. The bioships began moving slowly toward the human fleet, expecting another easy conquest. That expectation lasted exactly 30 seconds. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that made the Devour Swarm recoil in shock. Nuclear warheads began detonating against the bioships, creating brilliant flashes of light that could be seen from orbit. Antimatter torpedoes tore through organic holes like paper. Self-replicating hunter-killer drones swarmed toward the enemy vessels, programmed to reproduce themselves using the materials from whatever they destroyed. Direct hit on the primary feeding vessel, reported the weapons officer aboard the Retribution. Hull breach confirmed, but the structure is still active. The Devour Swarm's confusion turned to alarm, as they realized these new opponents were using weapons that the Galactic Collective had banned centuries ago as too destructive for civilized warfare. The bioships tried to retreat, but human ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything they had faced before. Captain Tom Wilson led the first wave of Marine assault shuttles toward the largest bioship. His mission was simple: get inside and rescue as many Rillan civilians as possible, while his fellow Marines planted explosive charges throughout the structure. Breaching hull now, Wilson reported as his shuttle's cutting beams sliced through. Organic armor. Initial scans show thousands of pods in this section alone. Wilson and his Marines fought their way through corridors that pulsed and shifted like living tissue. The bioship tried to defend itself by releasing toxic gases and growing spines from the walls, but human-powered armor protected the Marines from the worst of it. "Admiral, you need to see this," Wilson said through gritted teeth as he reached the first pod chamber. Inside transparent containers, Ryland civilians hung in green fluid, their eyes tracking the Marines' movements. They're still conscious. After weeks of torture, they're still aware of everything happening to them. Ow. Wilson used his armor's cutting tools to slice through the first pod. The Ryland inside gasped as breathable air hit his lungs for the first time in days. His body was partially dissolved, but he was alive. "Thank you," the Ryland whispered in broken English. "Please. The others, save the others. We're going to get all of you out," Wilson promised. But privately, he wondered how many they could save before the bioship's defenses overwhelmed them. "Captain Wilson, this is Admiral Carter. What's your status down there?" "It's worse than we thought," Admiral Wilson replied as his team moved to the next pod chamber. These creatures didn't just want to eat these people. They wanted them to suffer as much as possible during the process. The Rylands have been conscious through weeks of torture. Carter's response was immediate and final. "Copy that, Captain. Get our people out of there and then make these monsters pay for every scream they caused." Around the 3 planets, the human fleet continued its relentless assault. The Devour Swarm was learning that they had chosen the wrong species to threaten. What happened next wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was something far more brutal and complete. The human fleet didn't just attack the Devour Swarm. It began systematically wiping them from existence with a thoroughness that shocked even their own allies. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Retribution, coordinating an assault unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. While other species fought wars with careful precision and diplomatic restraint, humans had a different approach entirely. They called it total war, and it meant that everything the enemy possessed would be destroyed completely. Engineering reports. "Ready on Project Sledgehammer," her operations officer announced. Carter nodded grimly. Project Sledgehammer was exactly what it sounded like. The human fleet had identified 17 large asteroids in the system, and was now using gravity manipulation technology to turn them into kinetic weapons. Each asteroid would impact the bioships with the force of a nuclear explosion, but without the radiation that might harm surviving Rylan civilians. "Launch sequence initiated," the weapons officer reported. "First asteroid will impact in 47 minutes. Meanwhile, other human ships were deploying something even more terrifying. The fleet's science vessels had been working around the clock to analyze samples of Devour Swarm biomaterial. They had developed a synthetic virus that attacked the organic ship's nervous systems, causing them to turn on each other in confusion and pain. Captain Rodriguez watched from the Vengeance as one of the massive bioships suddenly began attacking its neighbors. The virus was working exactly as designed, turning the swarm's collective consciousness into a weapon against itself. "Target is consuming its own support vessels," Rodriguez reported with satisfaction. "The biological weapon is exceeding all expectations." Deep inside the largest bioship, Major Dave Thompson led his Marine squad through corridors that pulsed like arteries. His powered armor was covered in a mixture of alien blood and organic fluid that leaked from the walls. The bioship was dying around them, but Thompson's mission wasn't finished yet. "Movement ahead," whispered Corporal Kelly Watson, her rifle. Trained on a doorway that seemed to breathe, "Looks like we found something important." Thompson used his armor's sensors to scan beyond the doorway. What he found made his blood run cold. The chamber beyond contained thousands of eggs, each one the size of a human child. They were growing inside organic pods, fed by tubes that connected to the ship's main digestive system. "Command, this is Thompson. We've located what appears to be a breeding facility. It's estimated 4,000 eggs in various stages of development." The response came immediately from Colonel Diana Martinez, who was coordinating the ground assault from orbit. Her voice was hard as steel. "Ow, burned them all." "Major, Every last one. We're not letting this species spread to another world. Thompson's Marines moved methodically through the breeding chamber, using plasma torches to destroy each egg pod. The work was grim but necessary. Each egg represented a future devour swarm that would torture and consume innocent civilians across the galaxy. "Sir, some of these eggs are almost ready to hatch," reported Sergeant Jim Crawford. "Should we capture a few for study?" "Negative," Thompson replied without hesitation. "Our orders are clear. A total elimination." On the surface of the first planet, rescued Rillan civilians watched in amazement and growing terror. As human forces worked with mechanical precision to eliminate every trace of the swarm, the humans didn't just kill the bioships, they sterilized entire areas with controlled nuclear fire to ensure nothing could survive, or REGROW. An elderly Rillan named Velkera approached Sergeant First Class Robert Davis, who was overseeing the placement of charges that would destroy a swarm nursery. The alien's translator device converted his words into English. "Why do you not capture some of these creatures for study?" Velkera asked. "Our scientists could learn much from understanding their biology." Davis looked at the Rillan elder with eyes that had seen too much horror over the past few days. The answer was simple and final. "Some things don't deserve to exist, sir. Some evil is so complete that the only proper response is to make sure it can never hurt anyone again." The Rillan stepped back, disturbed by the human's matter-of-fact tone. He was beginning to understand why the Galactic Collective had quarantined these warriors. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure their enemies would never be able to threaten anyone ever again. From a safe distance, collective observers watched the human fleet work with growing alarm. Admiral DeSiska sent increasingly frantic reports back to the Galactic Council. "The humans are not conducting a rescue operation," one report read. "They are conducting an extermination. They have turned 17 asteroids into kinetic weapons. They have deployed biological agents that turn the swarm against itself. They're systematically destroying every egg, every nursery, every trace of this species' presence in this system." Another report noted, "Human ground forces are not taking prisoners." When asked why, they stated that some enemies are too dangerous to allow any possibility of survival or escape. They fight as if extinction of their target is the only acceptable outcome. The final report was perhaps the most disturbing. The rescued Rillan civilians appear both grateful and terrified of their human rescuers. They understand that they have been saved, but they also understand that they are witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that wages war not just to win, but to ensure their enemy ceases to exist entirely. As the last bioship died in nuclear fire, and the final swarm egg was destroyed by marine plasma torches, the human fleet began the process of sterilizing the 3 planets to ensure no trace of organic contamination remained. They were thorough, methodical, absolutely merciless in their commitment to making sure that the Devour Swarm could never threaten anyone again. The galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to ask the Deathworlders for help. 6 weeks had passed since the last Devour Swarm bioship was vaporized into atomic dust. The human Third Fleet had not simply completed their rescue mission and returned home. Instead, they had spent those weeks hunting down every trace of the swarm within 50 light-years of Rillan space. Admiral Carter's fleet had become a roving extermination force, following biosignatures and distress signals to find hidden swarm breeding grounds on dead moons and asteroid fields. They discovered feeding stations where the creatures had stored thousands of victims from dozens of different species. Each discovery only strengthened the humans, resolved to ensure complete elimination. The final tally was staggering: 47 swarm vessels destroyed, 12 breeding colonies eliminated, and over 2 million civilians rescued from biopods across 17 different star systems. The human fleet had literally erased an entire species from that section of the galaxy. Now Admiral Carter stood in the main conference chamber of the Galactic Collective's headquarters. Though she wasn't physically present, her image appeared as a hologram, transmitted from the bridge of the Retribution as it patrolled the former swarm territory. Her uniform still bore scorch marks and alien lot stains from the campaign. The Collective Council sat in a semicircle before her projection. their various alien faces showing mixtures of gratitude, fear, and uncertainty. These were the same beings who had voted to quarantine humanity 20 years earlier, calling them to violent and unpredictable for civilized space. "Honored council members," Carter began, her voice calm and steady. "6 weeks ago, you sent us a desperate message asking for help. You called us monsters then, just as you did during the border wars. You quarantined us because you said we were too violent for your civilized galaxy." Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Admiral Laziska, who had sent the original plea for help, looked down at his hands. Carter continued without emotion. "But when your civilization failed to protect innocent people, when your bureaucracy was too slow and your military forces were too scattered, you begged those same monsters to save them. And we did." "Admiral Carter," interrupted Counselor Zeth Prime, a tall insectoid creature from the Centauri region, "we're grateful for your actions. But the methods your species employed were ... extreme. The complete elimination of an entire species raises ethical concerns." Carter's expression didn't change. "Ethical concerns. Counselor, we rescued civilians who had been conscious while being slowly dissolved alive for weeks. Found breeding chambers where the swarm was creating. Thousands more of these torture ships. Some things are too evil to allow any chance of survival." "But surely some specimens could have been preserved for study," suggested another council member. "The scientific knowledge gained could have been valuable." "No," Carter replied firmly. "We've learned from human history what happens when you try to study pure evil while keeping it alive. It escapes. It spreads. It finds new ways to cause suffering. The Devourer swarm deserved extinction, and they got it." Back on Earth, President Hayes was dealing with the political aftermath of humanity's first major military action in decades. His communications officer walked into the Oval Office carrying a thick stack of papers. "Mr. President, these are formal requests for military assistance," the officer reported. "We've received 17 of them in the past month." Hayes looked through the papers. The Altarian Republic wanted help dealing with pirate fleets. The Vegan Trade Coalition was requesting human intervention against slavers who were raiding their outer colonies. 3 different species were asking for help with territorial disputes that had turned violent. "They spent 20 years telling us we were too dangerous to be trusted," Hayes said with a slight smile. "No. Everyone wants to hire the dangerous humans to solve their problems." The transformation was remarkable. Overnight, humanity had gone from galactic pariahs to the most sought-after military force in known space. Species that had previously avoided all contact with humans were now sending diplomatic missions to Earth, offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. At Terra Defense Command, Admiral Morrison was working late in his office when his secure terminal chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was listed as Galactic Collective Intelligence Division, and the file size was enormous. Morrison opened the message and found himself looking at the most comprehensive intelligence database he had ever seen. Star charts showing the locations of every known pirate base, slaver operation, and hostile military force in the galaxy. Detailed reports on criminal organizations that had been operating freely while the collective's forces were tied up in bureaucratic red tape. The attached message was simple, but spoke volumes. "We understand now why you were dangerous. We also understand why that makes you necessary. The galaxy needs guardians who are willing to do what civilized species cannot. Consider this our formal request for your services." Morrison leaned back in his chair and smiled. 20 years of quarantine had officially ended, not with a treaty or diplomatic negotiation, but with a simple acknowledgement of what humanity had always been: warriors, who protected the innocent by destroying those who preyed upon them. Within hours, Morrison had forwarded copies of the intelligence data to fleet commanders across human space. The Third Fleet was still patrolling former swarm territory, but there were other fleets, other ships, other Marines ready to answer the call. The galaxy had learned an important lesson during the Rillan crisis. When civilized methods failed, when bureaucracy moved too slowly, when evil needed to be stopped immediately and permanently, there was only one species to call. The humans were no longer quarantined. They had become the galaxy's guardians, whether the galaxy was entirely comfortable with that or not. And judging by the steady stream of requests for military assistance arriving at Earth every day, the galaxy was learning to be very comfortable with having monsters on their side. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human protection had begun.